Hello and welcome back to our 3D model video series on preparing 3D models for STK. And I'm your host, Lucas. Today we'll be talking about model pointing. So here we have, back in Visual Studio Code, our gmdf file open. This gmdf file has all the articulations added, and it also has the attach point added from the previous video. So to add model pointing to your 3D model, again, much like attach points, it's very simple in the gmdf file. It's only going to be a few lines of code. And the model pointing is added within an articulation. So for this drone model and for our example, I'm going to set up the drone such that the top of the drone, so if I come here into Blender, I'm going to set it up so that this little box right here is pointing at the viewer in STK at all times. Now to do that, as I said, we set up the model pointing within an articulation. So this Aurelia articulation holds all of the rotation articulations for the drone. And it's really important to note that for model pointing, if you set up model pointing and your model or whatever piece of your model you're wanting to point doesn't have a rotation articulation, it's not going to point. It needs to actually be able to rotate in order for it to point at anything. So, as I said, this Aurelia drone already has rotation articulation set up. Now, in theory, if we didn't want it to be able to rotate on all three axes and we wanted to lock the rotation to one, or the model pointing to one axis, then we could delete, for instance, the yaw and the roll articulations and just have the pitch articulation. And the drone would then only be able to point along its local x-axis. Now for the demonstration purposes, I'm going to leave all of these rotation articulations on because we want the drone to be able to point at the viewer no matter what orientation the viewer is at. So the model pointing block is going to go between the stages block and the model nodes block. And if I enter a new line and I hit Control and space, you'll see one of the options here is pointing vector. And the model pointing vector is going to be literally just a unit vector that is pointing in whichever direction you want your model or piece of your model to point. So as I said, we want this drone model to point on its local z axis, and considering the orientation changes between Blender and STK, what that means is that STK is going to want to point along the y-axis. So we're going to define this unit vector as 0, 1, 0. And now, once we hit save and we inject this information back into the GLTF, so I'm going to go to the GLTF, I'm going to hit F1. I'm going to type inject and select this inject gmdf into GLTF command. I'm going to save to make sure we've captured that new model pointing information. And then I'm going to right click on the GLTF file and I'm going to navigate down to GLTF, export to GLB. We'll save that file. And now that we've done that, when we come into STK, we're going to see that model pointing has been set up. So I've got the final model loaded in here with the model pointing already set up. I'm going to come into the drone properties, and you'll see under the 3D graphics properties, there's actually a specific model pointing properties panel. You'll see pointing name, and pointing name is just going to be, if we go back to Visual Studio Code, you're going to see that pointing name is actually the name of the mesh that we're pointing in SDK. So you see body underscore LP here. And then we see assigned target object none, because right now we haven't set up any model pointing. But we have all these available targets. Every object in SDK is an available target for model pointing. And as I said, we're going to do viewer so that the drone, you'll see when I hit apply, the drone is going to be facing the view in the 3D graphics window. So I'm going to hit apply. Boom. And you see the drone now faces the viewer. And if I rotate around, you'll see that the drone rotates with me. If I open up the properties again, we could even change this to sun, for instance. And now the drone will always be pointing at the sun, which might be of use to you if you're trying to set up model pointing for solar panels. If I set this back to none, and hit apply, you'll see that the drone is still at whatever angle and orientation it was when model pointing was last turned on. So in order to correct that, we'll have to come back to 3D graphics model, and under the articulations for the Aurelia drone, I'll just have to go back in and reset these rotation articulations to 0. And once I've done that, you can see that the drone is back in the orientation it was when we started. That's all there is to model pointing. We will join you in the next video when we're defining solar panels.